Call Ian Murray to move new clause 1.
Thank you very much indeed. It's great to see you in the chair, and congratulations on your elevation to Deputy Speaker. I'd like to move, if I may, formally new clause 1 and new clause 21 in my name and that of my honourable friends. It would appear that tonight's debate is probably a little bit of déjà vu all over again, given that we debated full fiscal autonomy a few weeks ago. But given the committee stage of this bill has been dominated by the SNP manifesto commitment to deliver full fiscal autonomy and bringing forward their watered-down promise to deliver it this year, it's good that we get an opportunity to try and get it on the face of this bill. And in fact, as we witnessed last week, their hand had to be forced by the arch-Thatcherite colleagues across from the other side of the chamber when they went down the lobby with the Right Honourable Member for Gainsborough. And I said at the time, and it is still clear, that the worst possible scenario for Scotland would be SNPs demanding full fiscal autonomy and that being delivered for them by a majority Conservative government. And those words were echoed by... well, let me just finish off this particular, if I may. Indeed, those words were echoed by Dave Watson, the head of campaigns at Unison Scotland, who said, and I quote, "An incoming Conservative government faced with a big number of SNP MPs saying, OK, if that's what Scotland voted for, let's give them full fiscal autonomy. The Treasury would be able to dump £7.5 billion of the deficit on the Scottish Government and just walk away." The fact that the SNP have another fudged amendment this evening shows you on the order paper that they themselves don't believe that full fiscal autonomy would be good for Scotland. And can I just say, before the honourable gentleman for Perth and North Perthshire, I don't know if he is going to pop up and say too wee, too stupid, too poor, as he always does, but can I just remind the House that that was a phrase actually coined by the SNP Finance Secretary and no one else in terms of that particular phrase, and I think it's worth putting that on the record, given he always pops up to do that. Lord Smith of Kelvin, in his report, said that one of the primary aims of the Smith Agreement was to provide the Scottish Parliament with accountability. I did say I would give way, and I will do so when I've made a little bit of progress, given the late hour that we are in. It is a Parliament that spends resources but doesn't raise any, and that means that there is no accountability or responsibility. That was in the words of Lord Smith of Kelvin. The Scotland Act 2012 resolved that position a little with the devolution of the most immovable taxes and 10 pence of income tax. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman before he bursts a blood vessel.
I'm very, very grateful for the honourable gentleman for giving way, and this rewriting of history is great. It is fantastic to find out the position of the Scottish National Party. Perhaps he can explain the position of Scottish Labour on this, because he abstained on full fiscal autonomy. Is that because he's now uncertain, or is it because he's maybe unsure about full fiscal autonomy now?
Well, I'm delighted for that intervention, because what I didn't want to do last week was rain on the parade of the Scottish National Party going down the lobby with the Thatcherite Conservatives to deliver full fiscal autonomy for Scotland. And that's why it seems to be that it's on. They were in full agreement with the honourable member for Gainsborough again tonight in terms of the devolution of the entirety of income tax. Perhaps they do have a right-wing agenda after all. This bill, as we know, provides full control of nearly 50% of revenues and over 60% of spending. 65%, I think it's worth noting, by the House of Commons Library, if the devolution of housing benefit is indeed agreed tomorrow in some of our amendments. It will make it one of the most powerful devolved parliaments in the world, and the OECD ranked the Smith proposals and came to the same conclusion. But with that accountability and responsibility must come transparency and honesty. During the general election campaign, the First Minister and SNP candidates repeatedly said that they would vote for full fiscal autonomy this year. This was reaffirmed in the television debates. All the impartial, independent, expert analysis of full fiscal autonomy shows clearly that it would devastate Scotland's financial position. And that is the genesis of... If the Scottish Government merely want to dismiss all the independent experts simply because they don't agree with them, then let's set up an independent commission that looks at the consequences of Scotland's finances for full fiscal autonomy. I'm happy to give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm grateful, Chair, to the honourable member for giving way. In terms of the clauses, it says, number 2, no member of the House of Commons or of the Scottish Parliament may be a member of the Commission. Is the member then saying that the honourable members of the unelected, unaccountable chamber at the other end of this building would be members, such as possibly a future chair, Baroness Goldie of Bishopton?
Well, I think the amendment's quite clear. I don't think it would be appropriate, but I don't think... Madam, I don't think the amendment's quite clear, but I don't think it would be appropriate for members of the House of Lords to serve on this commission. If they would just allow me to finish the sentence before they start braying again from the back benches. The commission would specifically be designed not to have any politicians on it, which is what the intervention just said from either Parliament, no employees of the Scottish Government or the Government, or any agency related to them. It should be a commission of impartial experts in the field, and I'm very happy to take on board, and if the Minister wants to agree with this new clause, for no member of the House of Lords to appear on that as well. Why? Well, the much-quoted Institute for Fiscal Studies analysed full fiscal autonomy in Scotland and said that it would cost £7.6 billion next year and up to £10 billion by 2020.
Point of order, Alex Hammond.
If I heard him correctly, he seems to be redrafting his clause during his speech. Indeed. Can it be in order for him to redraft his clause to exclude the House of Lords during his own speech? Can he be that uncertain of his arguments?
I think the honourable gentleman knows that that is a matter for debate, so let's continue with that debate. Ian Murray.
The problem with the right honourable member for Gordon is he doesn't want to debate full fiscal autonomy because he knows it's a bad policy. And let me just re-emphasise again, if the Minister, the Secretary of State, wishes to accept our amendment, I'd be more than happy to ensure that members of the House of Lords went on that particular commission as well. Let's be transparent and accountable in this place, Madam Deputy Speaker, rather than them having to nitpick on part of a clause. What they don't want is the scrutiny, and that's the key to this particular argument. So let's look at some of that scrutiny. The much-quoted Institute for Fiscal Studies analysed that full fiscal autonomy in Scotland and said it would cost Scotland £7.6 billion next year and up to £10 billion by 2020. They have also been clear that this is over and above, and this is crucial, this is over and above the position of the deficit of the UK at the moment and the spending profile of the current Conservative government. So let me emphasise again, as it has been misquoted by the honourable member from Murray on a number of occasions, that this is in addition to the current UK deficit, the deficit of £7.6 billion. The impartial analysis has been dismissed by the Scottish Government, so let's turn to another source of information. Her Majesty's Treasury analysed it broadly in line with the Institute for Fiscal Studies. According to Treasury costings that I obtained from a Freedom of Information request, full fiscal autonomy would leave Scotland with an additional cash terms deficit of £7.7 billion in 2015. 16, rising to £8.4 billion in 1920, so broadly similar to the Institute for Fiscal Studies. Again, this will no doubt be dismissed, so let's look at the Office for Budget Responsibility Oil and Gas report, published just 10 days ago. It shows that revenue from the North Sea is projected to fall from £36.7 billion to just £2 billion in the period of 2020 to 2040. Again, not just being dismissed by the SNP, but being dismissed at this very moment in time by the member for Perth and North Perthshire. So let's try, shall we, the Scottish Government's own annual accounts in the form of the GERS report published in March this year. The Scottish Government's own annual accounts shows an annual deficit over and above the UK deficit of some £4 billion, and the projections are due to worsen with the lower oil price. The Scottish Trade Union Congress, well, just before I tell you the Scottish Trade Union Congress, we'll hear from the honourable gentleman.
And we have the honourable member for giving way. You'll be aware that between 2007 and 2009 the UK's deficit quadrupled. Given the significance he's laying to deficits and for one particular year, what significance would he attach to a quadrupling of a debt by a state in a 2-year period?
Well, I'm not really sure I understand the intervention, to be quite frank, Deputy Speaker. We're debating here in terms of a deficit in Scotland being £7.6 billion over and above any UK deficit, rising to £10 billion by 2020. That seems to me, if we're defending Scottish jobs and livelihoods, not just to be economically incredible, but actually economic illiteracy at the same time. And it's not, again, just my words. The STUC Congress, the STUC General Secretary, Graham Smith, commented that the Scottish Government's own accounts were, and I quote, a sobering reminder of some of the risks of full fiscal autonomy. That's the trade unions in Scotland. The Scottish Government sneaked out their own oil and gas bulletin, their very first since May 2014, last week on the last day of the Scottish Parliament, and it would be very good to look at that alongside the Independence White Paper. The bulletin was very much in accord with the Office for Budget Responsibility that was rubbish just a few days before. It shows that North Sea oil revenues and projections have fallen drastically in recent times. So let's have a look at those figures. The Oil and Gas Bulletin, the Scottish Government's own Oil and Gas Bulletin from June 2015, estimated North Sea tax receipts for the period of 16 to 20 to be £5.8 billion. The same scenario from the same bulletin just 13 months earlier estimated the receipts to be well in excess of £26 billion. Even if we just compare 1 year, say 2016-17, revenues had fallen from a projected £6.9 billion to £1.1 billion, and even the lower estimates show just as low as £500 million. These are Scottish Government's own figures. All in all, an 85% drop, and that does two things. Firstly, it blows apart the financial basis for full fiscal autonomy, and secondly, it calls, as my new clauses 1 and 21 do, for a more robust and impartial analysis of the Scottish economy and public finances. That is why I have brought forward New Clause 1 and New Clause 21 to the House this evening, because New Clause 21 alongside New Clause 1 would provide for the creation of a Scottish Office for Budget Responsibility to exercise independent and impartial fiscal and budget oversight over Scottish Government devolved competencies. The Smith Commission recommended that the Scottish Parliament, and I quote, should seek to expand and strengthen the independent scrutiny of Scotland's public finances in recognition of the additional variability and uncertainty that further tax and spending devolution will introduce into their budget processes." Unquote. This would do just that and take away the politicisation of what are the fundamental underpinnings of the Scottish economy, the financing of Scottish public services, and crucially, and something that tends to be forgotten about in this debate, the livelihoods of everyone living and working in Scotland. And I would go further and ensure that the Scottish Office for Budget Responsibility assesses and reports on individual party manifestos so the public can be confident that what they are being sold is both credible and desirable. It's about simple transparency and accountability. And that transparency and accountability, as I have said, has not been forthcoming on the current manifesto commitment for full fiscal autonomy. If we had a Scottish Office for Budget Responsibility at the last election, it would have reported that FFA would be hugely disadvantageous to Scotland. It would have backed up the IFS analysis that showed that FFA did not work, and Scotland would need a real terms growth rate of 4.5% per year at least between 2013-14 and 1920. And the STUC again, the Assistant General Secretary of the STUC, Mr Stephen Boyd, commented exactly on this and said the implications across the board is that taxes would be cut in the SNP manifesto. There are a number of examples where the Scottish Government would be trading a real and immediate cut in revenue for the benefit that may not be great in the longer term. That shows that it would not be achievable in the figures from the IFS. So the conclusion from the IFS is that the FFA would incur, and I quote, deep cuts in spending or huge tax rises. It's easy to talk about figures, percentages and statistics, but this has to be about the everyday lives of ordinary hard-working Scottish families. Inflicting a policy in Scotland that would leave a deficit larger than the entire education budget and more than 3/4 of the NHS budget will not assist Scotland. We all reject the misguided austerity from this Conservative government, as we know it's being given rather than an attempt to balance the country's finances. But we must also reject any policy that would inflict harsher and deeper austerity in Scotland. This isn't, as some would claim, and are currently claiming as I speak, Madam Deputy Speaker, about being anti-Scottish or anti-aspirational or anti-hope for the ingenuity, passion or entrepreneurial spirit of Scotland, but a sobering response to a key manifesto commitment from the Scottish National Party. I know they dismiss the views of the IFS, I know they dismiss the views of the Office for Budget Response, the views of their own GERS reports, but even Jonathan Portes, the Director of the National Institute of Economic and Social Research, said on FFA, if the SNP plan for full fiscal autonomy were to go ahead, then, as a number of commentators have consistently said, that would lead to a very in Scotland. That is why Labour are against full fiscal autonomy, and that is why we believe in the pooling and sharing of resources across the United Kingdom, and that is why the public voted to remain part of the United Kingdom. If the SNP are so confident, I'm happy to take an intervention.
I thank my good friend. Does he not see a contradiction by standing up and telling us repeatedly that full fiscal freedom would be bad for Scotland, and asking for an independent budget review, which he clearly doesn't want to take account of? Isn't there a contradiction? You want an independent budget review, an independent budget, going to say?
Well, I mean, it's a rather strange intervention, because if you read New Clause 1 and you read New Clause 21, you'll see very clearly that what they're asking for is an independent commission to analyse the consequences in Scotland for full fiscal autonomy. And if you are so confident in your figures, back it, we'll have it, and we'll have the transparency, the impartiality and the independence of those particular policies. And if you were so confident that you weren't fiddling the figures, help us set up a Scottish Office for Budget Responsibility and let that body analyse your particular figures. But it's quite clear again that when you shine the light of scrutiny on the Scottish National Party's policies, they want to talk about the process and not actually looking at the impartial and independent evidence that's before us. So if they are so confident, they will back our New Clause 1 and our New Clause 21 and bring much needed transparency, credibility and accountability back to the Scottish Parliament's finances.
New Clause 1, Independent Commission on Full Fiscal Autonomy.
The question is that New Clause 1 be read a second time. Stewart Hosie.
Ms Engel, I beg to move New Clause 33 in my name and those of my honourable friends. Before I start on it, having witnessed, I think, one of the worst speeches in 10 years, a Labour Party who now have one argument. We've gone from too small, too poor and too stupid for independence to too small, too poor and too stupid for any powers at all. The honourable gentleman spoke about something which was credible. Credible. The Scottish people decided what was credible in the election in May, and they didn't say his party. He spoke about right-wing Thatcherite Tories. It sounds to me like the core vote of the only Scottish MP left in Scotland. Miss Engel, our new clause would require the Scottish and UK governments to enter into an economic agreement setting out a plan for implementation of full fiscal autonomy for Scotland and establishing a framework within which the two governments coordinate their economic and fiscal policies in the context of full fiscal autonomy for Scotland. The new clause means that the Scottish Parliament and Government have competence for revenue raised in Scotland through taxation and borrowing, and for determining levels of public expenditure in or as regards to Scotland. We see the framework including arrangements for facilitating fiscal coordination, overseeing economic cooperation, safeguarding fiscal sustainability and setting out the joint responsibilities in certain areas. In the agreement, the two governments must seek to ensure the maintenance of monetary stability throughout the UK and the single market of the UK and the EU. They must also ensure cooperation in the exercise of all of their respective functions relating to the administration and collection of taxes, and an equitable and transparent approach to the consequences, resources and rewards. The Scottish Parliament and Government would retain the benefits of increased tax revenues as a result of positive policy impacts, and would have the powers they need to manage the consequences of full fiscal autonomy. I'm very conscious time is short and others may need a few minutes to say a few words. So if I turn very briefly to New Clause 1 and New Clause 21. New Clause 1 requires that a Tory Secretary of State appoints a commission of between 4 and 11 members, none of whom can be members of Parliament or the Scottish Parliament or employees thereof. It is an amendment backed by Labour and UKIP members. So we have a Labour amendment backed by UKIP asking a Tory Secretary of State, a Tory Secretary of State to appoint a commission of the great and the good from the House of Lords to determine Scotland's future. What a lot of absolute rubbish.
Speaker, just for clarity in the House, and the House will know the procedure of this House, that any honourable member can sign any amendment they so wish.
So we have confirmation, Labour and UKIP hand in hand, empowering the Tories to rule over Scotland again. And the second new clause, 21, a Scottish OBR. We already have one. It's called the Fiscal Commission. The consultation on its expanded power closed on Friday. You'd have thought Scotland's sole Labour MP might have actually known what was going on. If I may turn back for a moment or so to new clause 33. It will have the Scottish and UK governments enter into an economic agreement which should set out a plan for the implementation of full fiscal autonomy and establish a framework within which the two governments will coordinate their economic and fiscal policies in the context of full fiscal autonomy. That would mean the Scottish Parliament and Scottish Government having competence for determining revenues raised in Scotland through taxation and borrowing, and for all of the spending, paying compensation to the UK for shared services. This is the right approach to take. I'm just disappointed we didn't have proper time to debate this, rather than be subject to the nonsense rant and the talking Scotland down by the so-called Shadow Secretary of State. By taking responsibility for key areas of Scottish life, we can improve the Scottish Parliament, improve their ability to deliver real progress for the Scottish people. I believe new clause 33 does that. It rejects the miserablest approach of the Labour Party, and I commend it to the House.
Minister.
I'll speak very briefly. Ms Engel, I don't need a commission to tell me what a disaster full fiscal autonomy would be for Scotland. The member for Edinburgh South set out the facts. The facts are clear. A £10 billion black hole for Scottish taxpayers to fill. We don't need a commission to tell us that. I don't accept the amendment in relation to a Scottish OBR because one thing that the member for Dundee said is correct. It is for the Scottish Government to determine for the people of Scotland how they will ensure independent oversight of fiscal policy. The UK Government would like to see legislation brought forward by the Scottish Government to be consistent with OECD principles for best practice in independent fiscal institutions, and we therefore look to have those discussions during the negotiation of the fiscal framework. But on that basis, on the rejection of the amendments, I propose that we move to pass the clauses as stated.
The question is that new clause 1 be read a second time. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Division. Clear the lobby.
The ayes to the right, 100. Noes to the left, 376.
The ayes to the right, 192. The noes to the left, 376. The noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock. Order. Under the terms of the order of the House of 8th of June, I must now put the questions necessary to bring proceedings to a conclusion. New clause 21. Ian Murray to move formally. The question is that new clause 21 be added to the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. 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 Division. Clear the lobby. Order.
The ayes to the right, 194. The noes to the left, 376.
The ayes to the right, 194. The noes to the left, 376. The noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock. New clause 33. Stewart, Hosie to move formally.
Formally.
The question is that new clause 33 be added to the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Division. Clear the lobby.
The ayes to the right, 58. The noes to the left, 504.
Thank you.
The ayes to the right, 58. The noes to the left, 504. I think the noes to the left have it. Unlock. New clause 54. Mr. Hosie to move formally. The question is that new clause 54 be added to the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Division. Clear the lobby.
The ayes to the right, 57. The noes to the left, 311.
That was said. The ayes to the right, 57. The noes to the left, 311. The noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock.
Please.
Order. Order. Order, order.
I beg to report that the committee has made progress and ask leave to sit again.
Committee to sit again what day?
Tomorrow.
Committee to sit again